Welcome to Charles Dickens' A Brain on Fire, a series that digs deep into the life and works of one of the greatest novelists of all time. Hi everyone, I'm thrilled to be joined by one of the UK's leading handwriting experts, Emma Bache. Graphologist, psychotherapist and columnist for both the Times and Financial Times, with frequent appearances on radio and TV, Emma's book, Reading Between the Lines, published by Quercus, is a fascinating insight into what a professional eye can detect from anyone's handwriting, with analysis of people such as Shakespeare, Beyoncé, and the reader, who is also encouraged to write sentences for examination. In this episode, Emma looks at the original manuscripts of the Pickwick Papers, A Christmas Carol, and the final page of the Mystery of Edwin Drood, to see what the strokes of Dickens's pen on the paper each time can tell us about the personality, character traits, health, and emotion of the man in the moment of writing. And if you'd like to see all the handwriting samples as we talk about them, go to @DickensFire on Twitter, and there are links or images to each one. But, of course, if you're driving or walking the dog, you can still follow what is said clearly enough without the pages in front of you. Our conversation starts now, mid-sentence, with a potential bombshell discovery from Emma.
You know, I analysed Dickens' handwriting. I think I told you, didn't I? It was years ago when I was doing a job for Ancestry, and it was a letter that he wrote to his father, apparently the night before his wedding. And it just showed that he was nervous. But I mean, looking at his writing, it's something I feel quite strongly about, which I didn't feel strongly before. And I'm looking at the letter that he wrote when he was 24. I think he was bisexual.
Really? That's so interesting.
Let's face it, he's not alive to take issue with it, but there are aspects of handwriting that can show sexuality, and not all gay people or bisexuals would have these elements to their writing. But when I do see it, they do tend to be. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do.
And he does have these aspects, which is quite interesting. Now, whether I didn't pick this up before or what. Now, I know that some people think maybe he was a bit of a sex addict, possibly. You know, obviously in those days, you know, men were allowed to behave in a certain way without being called an addict or whatever. But obviously with any addiction, then, you know, any sort of discernment that somebody might have goes out the window anyway. So it's just an interesting aspect, you know.
Oh gosh, Emma, well, we've really gone straight into the depths.
That should get a few conversations.
Oh yeah, I'll be getting lots of emails.
I'm sort of bemused as to why I didn't see it before.
Do you find, though, with your work... hello, by the way. I don't think I've welcomed you properly to the episode,
hello,
but that's quite all right.
That's
quite. I have to say, Emma, ever since I started this series, I've been wanting to talk. I didn't know it was you that I was looking for, but I've been wanting to talk to a graphologist, handwriting expert, because it's so fascinating to just look into that. But he was married at 24, and actually the first extract that we picked out is that same year with Pickwick.
Yeah.
So my first question, though, actually, just thinking that, and maybe that's why you didn't detect what you saw this time, going back to that first letter, is that if you know something about this person, if they're a famous person, a famous historical person, do you have to work harder to see beyond that to get to the human at all?
What do you mean? Because I have preconceived
Yes.
ideas? I think with somebody like Dickens, not so much. I mean, I'm not a historian myself, so I really didn't know that much about the man. So I think not. I think when it becomes more difficult for me is when I'm analysing somebody more controversial and more contemporary and more written about, i.e. Trump or Boris Johnson or whatever, you know, because we all have an opinion, don't we, on these people, because we are bombarded with the visual and the written and everything else about them. And so, and like any celebrity, you know, we feel as though we know them. And so if I detect things in their writing that everybody would know, it's not of no interest. But for me to see something that is controversial, and it's only controversial because it would go against what most people's idea of that person already is. That's what makes it interesting. Whereas with Dickens, he's not a contemporary character, and I didn't know that much about him. So, yeah, so that's really...
Oh, that's interesting. That's
Yeah.
interesting. From my position, I'm trying to slightly unlearn all the things I think I know about him, because it's very interesting to just go straight to the manuscript and everything. And of course, we'll be talking about your work and your book, Reading Between the Lines, which will have a link in the description for people to look at. And I've really enjoyed working my way through that. And you're in no danger of losing your profession, your work to other people, because it's so complicated. I mean, it's very clearly put, but actually, as you go deeper and deeper, you think, my God, the years that you've put into all of this.
Well, I suppose it is really. I mean, it's sort of horrific for me to think about how many years I've been doing it. And somebody says, "Oh, how many years have you been a graphologist?" I want to say like 10, 15, but it's not. I mean, it's like decades and decades, which is just, a terrible reflection on my decrepitude, really.
We've got 3 Dickens manuscripts to look at from different points in his life. And the first one is when he was 24, and it's an installment of the Pickwick Papers from the Christmas chapter of 1836. So what can you tell us about it?
I mean, first of all, it's a lovely handwriting aesthetically, but of course I'm not really just interested in the aesthetics, because somebody can have very pretty handwriting and not be very pretty inside, if you know what I mean. But his handwriting as a young man here is very fluid. It's got a lovely rhythm to it. And you've got to remember that the time that he was taught to write in, more than 1 century ago, things were very different. And he would have been taught to write in a very formalized, slow writing. But actually, his script, he's gone against that. And it's very fast flowing. He's highly intelligent. But there's also aspects of it which show how well organized he is as well, because the spacing is quite regular between the words. So although it's speedy writing, he is actually able to keep it relatively legible in a neat and orderly way. There's a great sense of humor there. There's lots of loops. There aren't many angles with the connecting strokes between the letters. There aren't many angles, which would suggest that perhaps he's not particularly aggressive and that he sort of goes with the flow. But actually, when you look at the T bars, the bars that cross the letter T, they're actually quite thick, which shows an enormous sensuality, which I think we could talk about later on in his life. But T bars are quite thick, slightly dagger-like, some of them. And so they go from being thick to quite pointy, which does show quite a cutting aspect to his writing. A lot of sarcasm, which also can be like a cutting wit, which obviously is a sign of intelligence. But despite the fact that he's very emotional and creative, this isn't a man, I suspect, that you would want to try and pull the wool over his eyes or to be rude to, because he would come back with something far ruder. So he's not somebody who takes fools very lightly, I would say, even though he would say it with a lot of charm and a sense of humour. There are lots of signs of good literary brain. The letter D often sort of goes back in on itself in a leftward stroke, which can mean a slightly self-protective thing, but I don't see the other self-protecting signs in his handwriting. But that's often a sort of a literary or highly intelligent aspect to his writing. But everything's speedy. This is a very, very sophisticated brain here, but there's a lot of sensuality. I think with Dickens, the way things felt and the way things looked was highly important to him. This is not a mathematician.
Right. Well, it's interesting.
To be rude to mathematicians, but that.
Yes, of course. And there's a 3-word that I noticed on this page, about 12 lines down, and talking about what you just said about those shooting T's, with the phrase just when they laughed. And that's such an interesting, it really jumped out at me. And of course, that whole passage is about people starting to laugh and having drinks and fun at a party.
Well, the thing is, I mean, it's you've read it, but as a graphologist, I'm looking at the handwriting and I never read what's on there.
Yeah.
So, because I don't want to be put off by the script, I don't want to be put off by what the person has said,
Yeah.
because that I can go off on a completely I'm a human being, and I could be go off on a tangent thinking about what the person has actually said. So I tend to look at the writing as a sort of picture, if you like, as a pictorial sort of pattern. But I'm trying to find what you just said, and they laughed.
When they laugh, about 12 lines. It's really it's sort of in the middle. I don't know if I think I've put a little highlight around it. If I show you, hold up the page. I should say also for listeners, I will post links to these readings.
Yeah. Yes, I've got it. Yes, I've got it. And in fact, oh yes, look at the T bar of the they. It's not just thick, that's very, very long. And that shows strong willpower and determination.
Right.
And good physical energy, but also a lot of mental energy as well. And if you look at the laugh, the L almost looks like a C, doesn't it? In
Yes.
the curved round. And if you look at it as a picture, if you like, the L curves in and the D curves in. And there's a sort of symmetry there, which is visually quite pleasing.
Yes. I like the W as well. There's that W.
I was going to get to the. I mean,
oh,
the
okay,
W
sure.
is rather stylized,
Yeah.
but that's rather nice. But it's a little bit, it looks a little bit like the dandy, doesn't it? It's sort of somebody, Dickens is certainly affected by the way things look and feel and everything to do with sensuality. But I would imagine, also tip over into slight vanity, and it would be important for him to look his best. And also, on that theme, it's not just visually looking his best. He's got a lot of strokes from the middle zone, and when middle zone letters like the small A's and E's and O's and U's that curve upwards into the upper zone, which is like the tall bits of the F's and the H's and the T's. And that's a sort of intellectual vanity, in that he knows he's clever and he wants other people to know it too.
I've just seen the word laughed a couple of lines before that as well. And he's so consistent in the way that he writes that word, it seems to me.
Well, it probably means that it's a word that he's used to performing, if you like. I think Dickens would have been tremendously good company.
What struck me, Emma, as well about this first one is, compared to what's going to come later, is that he seems to care that what he's writing is readable, that it's easily then transcribed for the printers.
Well, that is very true. I mean, the thing is that speed often makes handwriting illegible. So a lot of people think that actually a sign of high intelligence is when it's legible. Well, it can actually be the reverse of that. But the whole aging process does change us, obviously, physically, but it changes us emotionally and mentally as well. And just put into the pot any form of illness or physical ailment, and it does affect your handwriting. So, hopefully at 24, he was relatively, I don't know his medical history really, but hopefully at 24, he was relatively fit.
Yes, he was. I think he was, and had lots of energy in life, and was at the very beginning of it all. So
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, gosh, that's wonderful.
Should we just talk a little bit about his sexuality? What do you think?
Absolutely, because I have a little bit of extra things I can probably add to that as well. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, what I'm also finding quite interesting here is that the lower zones of the writing, if you think of the letter Y or whatever, the loop or the downward stroke, and you'd have it on a G as well, and an F ordinarily. We're taught, and he would have been taught as well as us, to make the stroke go to the left of the line. Now, he does do that sometimes, but if you look at the lower zone strokes, quite often it actually goes to the right, whether it's a sharp angle or a curve. Now, this is quite unusual. Now, the lower zone is to do with physicality and energy, but also sexuality. And it is very rare for me to see a writing where there's consistently lower zones going to the right. In other words, bucking the trend and going against the norm of what he'd been taught, without some form of either homosexuality or bisexuality. Now, I know that obviously he got married, he had many children, he was considered to be a ladies' man. But because of the extreme pastiness of the writing and the fact that I think it would have been very heavy pressure, obviously it's hopeless to form any opinion about pressure without the actual original. But I think there are aspects of this which show that he could be somebody who was quite an addictive personality. And there is a strong chance that he was actually had a sexual addiction, which would mean that he was possibly attracted to men as well as women.
While you're saying all this, and I can see the thing you're describing about it looping to the right, that lower zone, the Y, I can see at the ends and the margins the word lady twice.
See, I haven't even spotted. Oh, yes, I've seen the lady now. Actually,
and it's twice.
What's quite interesting about that, Dominic? Well, I'm looking at the lady where it says the old lady.
Yes.
And I have seen the other lady. Now I found it. Now, do you see that those are quite sharp angles?
Yeah.
Well, that reflects how he feels about women, and there is a little bit of tension there in that the softness of his writing and the emotional side seems to have gone, and there's a lot more tension. Now, I don't know what Dickens' relationship was like. I mean, we're going into the whole psychotherapy thing here, but I am actually a qualified psychotherapist as well. So I'm just wondering what his relationship was like with his mother, possibly.
Well, that's very interesting because he blamed her a lot for the misfortune in his childhood of having to work in a blacking factory and the shame of family moving into a debtor's prison.
Okay.
When really it was the actions of his father. But his father was, I think he had that element again of a showman and a bit and embracing and fun. And of course, later on with his wife, Catherine, he did enforce a separation. So that turns really quite nasty towards the end of his life. And it's not, I mean, he actually tried to have his wife committed.
Did he?
Yeah.
I mean, we have to hope that maybe he just didn't like women very much. But, it's possible that he saw elements of himself in his father, so he'd be protective towards his father. But also, often when you get a young man with a certain amount of ego and everything else, he will blame the mother, I'm afraid. So, maybe we're uncovering here a man that his social reputation was of a charming ladies' man, but deep down he didn't like women very much.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because combined with that, I think, reading Claire Tomalin's biography of Dickens, she said that he spent his life trying to impress women as well. So that mixed in is a need to have their adulation.
Well, and trying to impress his mother, possibly. And maybe his relationship with his mother was poor, so he was, we're going slightly outside the ground.
No, but this is so interesting.
It's and I mean, I suppose we need to look at how Dickens portrayed women in his novels.
Yes. At this stage, early on in the Pickwick Papers, the portrayal of women, and this has been talked about quite a lot in the series, is a lot of sort of either old bags, grumpy, or very, very attractive, pretty, sort of giggly things that scream when you help them over a turnstile, kind of thing.
Well, and nothing in between. Now, obviously, in that, in those days, as a woman, and as obviously we're all, I consider myself a feminist of sorts. I think women obviously had a pretty bad deal, and maybe that's how they were regarded generally. But possibly Dickens, it's maybe not a particularly nice man to be married to.
Oh gosh. It's funny, isn't it? You can see the signs early on here. But his characters that he writes as women later on become fantastic. Really, really good. But I think they start off a little bit two-dimensional.
Quite. Well, it's there is something of the narcissist about Dickens, but not in an appalling, murderous way. But yeah, there is a narcissistic element there in that he's so impressed with the way things look, and there is this strong determination, strong willpower. I wouldn't have thought he was particularly open to other people's suggestions, whether they were women or men.
And on the bisexuality, it's been commented on as well by biographers. He had very intense friendships with men. Very intense. His friend John Forster, there were all these letters and things backwards and forwards, and they would literally be sort of falling in each other's arms and sobbing at having seen each other again. And, so there was a lot of big display of...
Well, big emotion. I mean,
yeah.
and again, that sort of... Well, it's odd, isn't it, when we look back at history, and certainly the English, we often think, oh, well, stiff upper lip and men didn't sort of show any emotion to each other, whatever. But then they also had these big sort of romances, as I suppose we call them now, with men, which could, I suppose, these days be considered slightly odd for a heterosexual man. But everything was at extremes, wasn't it, really? Probably because there was so much repression, particularly in the Victorian era, so much repression of sexuality that,
On this, and this will apply obviously to all the extracts we've got, can you detect the 1830s or the 19th century in how it looks, going beyond the colour of the page and everything? Is there any writing?
Not particularly, actually. I would say, I mean, sometimes I can, but I'd say with Dickens' handwriting, his writing is actually much more modern. Much more modern. And of course, when I'm analysing handwriting, if I'm analysing somebody who was born in the 20th century, or I suppose 21st century now, people were pretty much taught the same sort of way of writing and everything else. But as we go historically, the copybook style was very different. And it certainly would have been with Dickens, but actually his writing is much more contemporary. He has gone away from that copybook style that he would have been taught quite a lot. So there's a high intelligence, high IQ, but a little bit of rebellion as well.
I like that.
Yes.
That's good.
We all like that.
Yeah, we all like that. Yeah, and his true self being uncovered as well, really.
Exactly.
Expressed on the page.
Yeah.
So, Emma, our second extract is the opening of A Christmas Carol. What can you see here? It seems to have changed quite a lot.
Well, you see, he was still at 31. I mean, still a young man, obviously. And it's just not, what are we talking about? It's only, a few years after
6 or 7.
31. But
yeah.
the slant of the writing, we didn't really talk about the slant, particularly the other one, but he has a slight right slant when he was 24. And the slant is really to do with your communication skills, your outward motion to other people, if you like. Now, when we go forward a little bit to when he's 31, the slant is more pronounced to the right, which shows, obviously that he was sociable and communicative, but there's an element of, dare I say it, desperation, of a sort of need to be with other people. And even the spaces between the words appear to have become smaller. So there's a need for him to, it's almost an invasion of emotional space with other people. Obviously, this writing has been corrected by himself many times. I think there's an order to the disorder, if you like. He knows exactly what he's doing. But the pressure appears to be a little bit more irregular, which could almost be the very beginnings of high blood pressure, that sort of thing. I would imagine that any ailments he's beginning to get is probably down to his emotional state. I mean, he's very much an alpha male, but he's also a type A personality, I suppose you'd say, because he's so full on. I feel as though there's almost here a deterioration of, dare I say it, stability, or just a sense of calm.
Yes. It's really interesting you say that, because there is one piece of information about this time that I know is that he was under a huge financial pressure at this moment.
Oh, really?
Okay. And he wrote this whole book in 6 weeks under that big pressure. And obviously things turned around for him, but at this point it's a bit of a shaky moment in his life. There's a lot riding on this story for him.
Well, there's also, I don't know if you could see, if just comparing it to the one at 24, the baselines, sort of the imaginary lines on the paper that he's stuck to, and he has got quite strong, they're just slightly rising on the first thing, which means sort of he feels quite enthusiastic and buoyant. But if you look at this one, if you look at the straight, they're slightly falling. I mean, I've seen a lot worse. It's not too bad.
Yes.
But it's slightly, and that could, of course, be the angle that he's got the paper. But all things being equal, if the angle of the paper is normal, then it's sort of, he feels, I mean, I couldn't tell whether it's financial pressure, but certainly he's under some sort of pressure.
And more crossings out. And I get the impression
Yeah.
that he doesn't really care as much what it looks like. There's something a bit more, he's just going to rattle this off and send it, and they're going to have to fix it at the other end to print it.
Exactly. And there's almost something a little bit more elderly about it as well. It's ridiculous to think of somebody at 31 as being elderly. But can you see that the horizontal pressure, that the T-bars, can you see that looks much darker than
Yes.
the downstrokes? And it's quite unusual to have more pressure in the horizontal as opposed to the vertical. And that's beginning to show a little bit of a temper there. Now, that could be because he's under pressure.
Yes.
Certainly shorter temper here, possibly losing maybe a little bit of his charm.
And the crossings out as well are interesting, aren't they? The kind of prison bars. That's quite a thing he does, I think. When he wants to get rid of a paragraph, he does that.
I ordinarily wouldn't make too much of that because I can see what he's done. Because he wants to make clear that, I don't know, all that needs to go or moved or something. I mean, it makes you realize how much easier it is, although it's not great for my profession, for people to type something on a computer and then just like delete it and stuff. But the energy and the mental and physical stress and energy in handwriting a whole book, I think we forget, anybody who's written a book and has typed it out on a computer should think about what it was like 100 years ago to write it all. We think of the stress of typing a book, but I mean, just imagine, especially with pen, which he would be constantly dipping into ink.
Yes. It occurred to me also, just obviously I'm taking this from what you're saying and from your book and the previous manuscript, is the words themselves are more measured in their height and depth, aren't they, a little bit? The upper and the lower zones seem to be nearer each other, maybe, in some way, or not.
Well, the whole thing looks more constricted. I mean, all the spacing seems to have got smaller. And this isn't such a good copy visually for me to see, but I talked in the first sample of the middle zones going up into the upper zones, which is a sort of slightly flamboyant thing, but it's, look, I'm intelligent. I want you to understand that I'm intelligent and acknowledge it. That seems to have gone, but it's almost as if, yes, you mentioned he doesn't care so much, but if he had to write an entire book in 6 weeks, then I don't think he had time to care so much.
Yeah. And some of the crossings out, the loopiness of the crossings out, is there anything in that kind of...
You mean going over and over?
Yes.
That is, because he's got quite loopy writing anyway, I would expect all the strokes he does to be quite loopy. So that's... No, I mean, I wouldn't make... I mean, if it was all angular and it was so heavy crossings out that he'd sort of scored through the paper, that would obviously be an indication of anger, if not violence. He doesn't have that. And who knows how many times he read through this before he crossed it out.
Yeah. Anything more on this one, Emma? What do you think?
Well, I'm just slightly shocked, really, at the deterioration in just a few short years. But of course, when I'm looking at writing, I'm looking at how the person is at that time, not the day before, not the day after, but also what they're writing about and who they're writing to will have an effect on the handwriting. But I didn't know that he was under external stresses like financial and things, but that would obviously make sense.
He's a father as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and his father, he might have just been feeling, pretty, under an enormous amount of pressure. It's possible that writing this, he wasn't enjoying it so much because he felt as though he was having to do this for monetary gain as opposed to literary acclaim.
It's so interesting, isn't it, as well? Because what the story became and what it meant for people and the effect it has on people, and then that juxtaposition with what it was like for him to be writing it in the moment is so fascinating.
But of course, A Christmas Carol itself, has quite a lot of dark elements to it, doesn't it? And it's, somebody, an old man looking back on his life and realizing lost opportunities and where he's gone wrong and bad choices in life. And it's quite an unusual theme for a 31-year-old to write about,
Yes.
So it's
Yeah.
possible that he was feeling he'd made some poor choices even at that age.
It's always very astonishing to find out that he's so young when he writes that,
I know,
actually.
exactly.
So, I wondered, Emma, at this point, before we go to the final Dickens manuscript, whether you'd be interested in having a look at something I sent you, which I wrote myself.
Yeah, I've got it here. So, and it's so nice that you've actually written it in my book. I can see that, which is like nice.
Yes, we should explain what's happening there, because your book, reading between the lines, there are sample pages for the readers to write down
Yeah,
sentences so that they can try and analyze a little bit of their own handwriting.
yeah.
So I've got it here, and I've got a lot to say about it actually. After you, I think I can answer hopefully in quite a bit of detail, because I really remember what it was as I did it at
Do you? Well,
7
that's good. That's good.
7 in the morning.
Again, I
So
haven't read what you've put. Now, okay. So if we look at your writing, what sort of pen did you use, Dominic? Did you use a?
I used a gel pen, which is
That's
always my
fine. No, no, no,
preferred.
no, 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 don't you say it in an embarrassed fashion. Everybody uses. Um, okay, so first of all, you've got really good balance. If we look at the word on the first line, forward, now the letter F is the only letter in the alphabet that goes through all three zones, the upper, middle, and the lower zone. And it just shows how well balanced you are. In between, the intellectual and the physical. Now, the middle zone, which is to do with day-to-day practicality and ego, is quite small, very small really, compared to the others, which shows that you're highly intelligent, but you don't have a massive ego, which is obviously good, and you're not obsessed with the practicality. Cerebral matters are more important to you. At the bottom of that F, it's like retracing, and I can see that there's the stroke is heavier pressure because you've retraced it. So you can feel you put yourself under quite a lot of pressure. You have very high goals for yourself, and you put yourself under pressure for that. There's quite a strong right slant, a little bit like Dickens there, which makes you an excellent communicator, and you're certainly very sociable, but the space between the words quite large compared to the size of the middle zone, which means that however sociable you are, you need time on your own as well. And you're probably quite happy to, I don't know about live alone, but quite happy to work alone. You're independent spirit, but you actually need to get away sometimes from everybody. When you've written on the fifth line down and you put Charles Dickens's life, the Charles Dickens actually leans to the left. So does the Charles. So you've stopped and paused before you've put that. And you have done a sort of accidental emphasis, if you like, on his name, which is fair enough because that's what we're talking about. And can you see you put, I think, gel pens? Well, the L is actually going to the right there, and that's the intellectual side. So your ideas are very creative. You can think quite differently from other people, but even if you come maybe to the same conclusion, you've got this investigative mind, but it's also very creative. You're not influenced by what other people think and what other people say to you. You've really got your own ideas about things. Your signature, now, signature is how you want to be seen by other people. It's a bit like your business card or shop front. So it may or may not have any reflection on how you really are. And it looks to me as though your signature is paler pressure, and it's not really very legible, whereas the rest of the script is. You're actually quite a private person, despite your extroversion or seemingly extrovert character. But it's got, again, like Dickens, it's got a great fluidity to it. You would have a very high form level, which is to do with intelligence and creativity. And can you see, again, if we look at that word forward, your connecting strokes are sort of arcaded, like they sort of go round, but there's a sort of going to the right, going forward. So you can be impatient with things, but mainly impatient with yourself because you've got this very quick mind. There's a lack of aggression here, really, I think. But I would imagine that you would just walk away from people that you find quite boorish. which is obviously a good thing. I mean,
Yeah, sure.
And your personal pronoun, the I, you've topped and tailed it, sort of like a Roman column. That's somebody who likes mental ball games and, things that stimulate your mind. And I mean, there are some aspects to your character, the good ones, right, that are quite like Dickens. You do share this literary love, but also very quick-minded and quick-witted sense of humour.
What you're saying, the thing you're saying about the signature, it's so interesting because I remember, and I wrote at the bottom of the page, my signature changed when I was 19. My signature used to be legible when I was in my late teens. You would be able to read my name, but then I went and worked in a tax office for a year where I had to sign so much in my year out, saving up and everything. I had to sign my signature and countersign so much. And I saw that other people just scribbled when they signed it. And so my signature then, and I really remember it became a bit more of a scribble.
So you basically turned into a doctor.
Right. Dr. Dom. Okay.
Although doctors now can't use that excuse of signing prescriptions because it's all done, online, isn't it? And they don't have to sign anything. But I think the more you sign things, the quicker it becomes, and your signature can almost become like a logo. And I don't think anybody expects to be able to really read a signature. But sometimes I'm looking at someone's handwriting and their signature is exactly the same as their writing. And their writing is often exactly the same as how they would have been taught, which isn't necessarily a positive thing. It's often somebody who's terrified of going out of their comfort zone, or perhaps they haven't really progressed that much since they were at school. But Dominic, I would imagine working in a tax office wouldn't have been brilliant for you.
No, it was... It served its purpose.
I hope you got paid a lot of money.
Unfortunately not, but I did move on from that. I did move on eventually from that. It wasn't where I was meant to be. But I can tell you some extra things if you're interested. But because I really remember. So the first thing with the eye, my eyes, I am very, and I would have done it when I emailed you initially. I'm very careful not to start too many sentences with I, me, or anything like that, because I feel embarrassed that it's too much I, me, personal pronouns. But I do it here. But I have this tendency, I think I'm quite strong at the start of a sentence, but I feel like I always have this anxiety when I'm writing something that I don't have enough space towards the end of the line to fit in everything I want to say. So things can start to crush a little bit towards the end. I don't do it too much here.
You haven't done it, actually.
Yeah.
And the reason why you'd be like that is because you are, those spaces between the words, you are well organized. You are creative, but not all creative people are well organized. You are. And actually, Dickens, he's left very small, if any, margins, right and left. So there's a sort of thing of invading personal space as well. You don't have that, because actually what is quite different about you from Dickens, well, there are lots of things that are obviously quite different, but you need more privacy time than he does.
That's interesting. There's something else. When I refer to you, you rang me very soon after I'd sent the email, and you're the first guest that's ever done that. And we had a really, I got a good chat, and I thought, you're going to be great to talk to. And so I had that kind of slight impression and inside as I was writing it. But then I remember consciously saying, I'm so looking forward to talking to the author. And I didn't put Emma, because I was aware that I was going to send it to you. And so a little formality crept in, and I noticed. Yes,
I didn't even notice that. You see, I'm so looking forward to talking to the author about her work. And
I would have said
you were distancing yourself from
I am, and I think the spaces, and no offense, but the spaces between the words "to the author" open up a bit as well there as well. And because if I write your name, if I write your name with my eyes shut, I really go for the first letter of people's name. I really make it their superhero symbol.
I like the way you've done the E.
Yes.
It would be, that sort of goes with your personal pronoun. So you've topped and tailed it. And you see, I don't like the way I write my own name, and I don't know why I do it. Well, no, I do know why I do it. Obviously.
Yeah, we haven't started on you yet. I'm ready to really turn the tables very soon.
I like that aspect of my personality, so I need to do something about it.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Because because that's one thing that people always say to me if I write them cards or letters or something. They're very aware of how I kind of lionize their names. I make their names very big. Certainly the first letter really big, like a superhero symbol. Yeah, it's but because I got a good feeling talking to you on the phone, but then I thought, oh no, I better just be careful, just backpedal a little bit. You don't really know Emma yet, So
well, you never have to worry about that. But the way you've written, I mean, I'm so jealous of you because the way you've written my name is how I want to write my name. But I write my name in a really, well, I'm giving away secrets now, sort of slightly self-defensive, tragic, don't be too horrible about me sort of way. And I think that I shouldn't be that person. I should be a more confident, upfront person, which is how you've written my name. So you might have changed me actually, Dominic. So I think I might have to change, even at my enormously advanced age. I think I'm about to change my signature entirely.
That's so funny because you are confident, you're very personable, and you rang me to talk to me. No one's ever done that, that I've messaged. They've always replied through their agent, or there's been an email backwards and forwards a little bit. I've never had that. You were straight on there. And so no, and I had a good feeling talking to you.
Yeah.
It made me thought you'd be a great guest and everything. It's so interesting that you say that. Has your work as a graphologist impacted the way that you write yourself?
Do you know, this is going to sound incredibly arrogant. No, because probably because subconsciously or consciously, I've completely avoided mixing with any other graphologist in my entire life. because
they're your enemies.
Well, they are actually. But when I studied graphology a million years ago, we had to analyse our own handwriting. And then even worse, we were encouraged to bring in the handwriting of our husbands, wives, girlfriends, boyfriends. And I think the woman who taught me actually wanted to split us all up. It was all a nightmare. The divorces were flowing, And we analysed ourselves. But the thing is, you can't analyse yourself just in the same way as I don't analyse my children's handwriting or whatever, because I feel as though I know them all enough already. But I haven't really changed my writing because I don't mix with other graphologists. But having said that, I can see when I'm under a lot of stress, or I'm not feeling very well, or I'm feeling particularly anxious about the subject I'm writing about or whatever. So I can see the changes that have just happened organically when I've written something, but I'm not going to change it, except for, as I said, that signature. I think I do need to change that. But again, you see, signature is not really me, is it? It's how I want to come across. So
that's interesting, because I think when my signature changed from being very legible to not being legible at all,
that's good. That's just a speedy. You've still got this strong D,
Yes.
Yeah.
But I'm also aware, if I'm going to be self-critical, is that in my life there have been times when I've lacked staying power. So I've had the energy to start something and not quite see it through. And I sometimes look at my signature and think, oh, well, very strong D there, but then it kind of, it comes back for a moment for the G for my surname and then falls away again. Amateur analysis.
I actually think staying power is overrated.
I'm glad I'm talking to you.
Because, staying power sounds... obviously it's got a positive ring to it, but also staying in something, whether it's a job or a relationship or just an emotion that doesn't serve you anymore, just because you feel you should, isn't such a positive thing. And it can impede progress,
Yes.
Of all sorts. So I wouldn't get too hung up about...
Get too hung up on that. All right. Okay. That's good. The only other thing I would say about my writing, where I refer to you as the author, is our age difference as well. And that's not meant to sort of say that it's gigantuan. It isn't, but it's enough for me to think that I'm addressing, almost like a teacher-pupil relationship there. So I'm
too depressing. I know what you mean, but actually, my children have no respect for me whatsoever. So
I was going to, but the other thing that maybe shows up is it actually rings. It doesn't. There's a moment in the writing that I've put down that doesn't ring true to me. Because I did want to write your name. I was going to, and then for some reason I just made a last fraction of a second decision to say to the author, this kind of Brechtian alienation came in.
I don't know. I'll only take it as a compliment. But I think, I think the age difference thing, the generation difference thing is quite interesting, because certainly when I was in my 20s, whatever, I did have a certain amount of respect for people who were my parents' age. But I think that's sort of gone now, hasn't it? I mean, I don't know that anybody has any respect for anyone anymore.
Maybe not as a default. I think you take it person by person, really, possibly.
Yeah.
And you want to be able to communicate with people on a level that makes them comfortable. And
Well,
and I suppose then if that means I'm a little bit more formal in the way I speak, then fine, or loose.
I think, I'm somebody who still shakes hands with people when I first meet them, and I sometimes people look at me and go, as though I'm some sort of pervert because I still shake hands. I mean,
you don't do the fist bumping or the elbow stuff.
oh no, please don't get me started on that.
It feels very fake. Maybe it needs a few more centuries to bed in. It doesn't mean anything.
I do, but there is a reason why we shake hands. It's so we show that we don't have a weapon in our hand. That's how it started. So to fist bump, I don't even know what that's saying, really.
No.
Anyway.
There was something that I liked very much at the start of your book where you were saying about people can be reluctant to send you letters or Christmas cards handwritten because they know that you can, if you choose to, you can analyse them.
Exactly. Well, it's true. And funnily enough, I probably get a few more handwritten letters and cards now than I did 25 years ago, earlier on in my career, probably because people have either forgotten what I do or think, or they don't care anymore, whatever. And I don't look at their writing so much, but I will notice, in the same way as I notice things that have changed in my handwriting, I will notice if I think things have changed in their writing. If I think, oh, so-and-so maybe going through a bit of a bad time or not very well or stressed out or something. But obviously, I'm not one of these people who phone up and say, oh, I think, because obviously I'd have even less friends than I do. But I can notice things, I suppose.
There's something just from talking to you that I find really fascinating, and I suppose it makes total sense, is when you're analysing written text, how you have to, in a way, not read it to be able to see clearly what you're looking for, that you can be thrown off if you start reading what's actually being said.
And then I can be totally thrown off. And the thing is that sometimes if I'm in a situation like at an event, which we haven't really talked about, an aspect of my work, where I might be having to analyse, I don't know, 60 people in an hour and a half or whatever. Obviously, I've got very little time. I haven't got time. I mean, I haven't got the inclination, but I haven't got time to read what someone's put. And I'm sure sometimes, and when I was younger, I did a lot of sort of parties and things like 21st parties or 40th parties. And I'm sure after a few drinks, there were all sorts of, drunken comments that people had written. And of course, it never got the reaction that they wanted because I never read them. So it must be quite frustrating. And on that note, I mean, slight adjunct to that is I do look at potential forgeries sometimes as well, which is a slightly different aspect of my work. And if you're ever thinking about going into that line, not as a graphologist, but actually as a forger, is that you have to stop looking at the word as a word or as a name. And so if you turn the page upside down, you see it more as a picture. And it's much easier to copy a picture and get a good match than it is to copy a signature or name, because even writing somebody else's name, we are influenced by the way we write that letter. So take the letter away and just see it as a hot tip there for anybody who's thinking about a different level of crime.
Should we now turn to the final Dickens extract, which is the final page of The Mystery of Edwin Drood, the novel he never finishes because he dies the next day. I think he has a stroke that very evening.
Was it the next day? It was the next day, was it?
He died. He has a stroke that night.
Right. Well,
I've told you too much already before you.
Well, I knew he died of a stroke, but I didn't. Gosh. Okay. So, if we remember what I was saying about the middle sample, in that it was slightly going down. Look at those lines really going down, aren't they? Going down to the left. Now, obviously, I'm looking at the scan here, but it looks as though there was no left-hand margin as well. There's, again, a desperation to get things down. But almost the pastiness of the writing is becoming more pronounced. It's very difficult to read, but even things that he hasn't necessarily scribbled out or crossed out. It's very pasty. And that can be a sign of, and again, I'm not medically trained, although I have actually worked with some medical institutions, can be a sign of high blood pressure. Now, I don't really know enough about strokes, but presumably he had high blood pressure before, but the size of the writing's got a lot smaller as well. Sometimes with micrographia, you get that happens with things like Parkinson's, but I don't necessarily see that here. But certainly the pressure of this and the stress of it would suggest that there was something going on with his blood pressure and possibly a lot of stress in his life that would just tip him over the balance, because 58 is not, even for those days, was quite early to die.
Yes.
There's something rather sad about it. He's lost his, he's lost his vitality. Of course, he would have done at that age, from the age of 24, but he also appears to have lost his sense of humour a little bit and his zest for life. The flamboyancy, the dandy appears to have gone here. Apart from that, can you see that sort of coiled squiggle at the bottom?
I was going to ask about that. It's so interesting. That's his final marking. I mean, possibly his final marking, isn't it? That squiggle.
Yeah, I don't quite... Did he do that at the bottom of every page?
I don't think he does. Certainly not in other manuscripts that I've seen. No, I don't think so.
But have you thought also, I mean, it could have been something as mundane as just testing the ink,
Maybe.
But it's very non-aggressive, that. It's all curves, it's all emotion. I just feel as though this is a man who's become much more introspective, and obviously at that age you've got, and certainly at that era, less to look forward to, more looking back. Now, I think he did have various health complaints, didn't he? I'm not quite sure what they were.
Yeah.
But it would have been quite interesting.
He'd had a stroke already.
Oh, he'd had a stroke already? Oh, God. Okay.
A couple of years before, or maybe a year earlier, I think.
Okay.
I've only just noticed there's this word that's written in the far right margin that's shooting down. It's obviously inserting something.
Oh, yes, I see that. Near the top.
Yeah.
Is it something like... Is it support or something? Is it double P or...
I can't tell if it's a double P
rapport or support or something.
Maybe. I'll see if I can...
But that's poor planning, isn't it? He's filled those margins, and somebody who leaves very little margin on the left where you start, that's a sort of impatience. I mean, it shows slightly poor organisational skills now, which he had better when he was 24. But it's like desperation for people to know what he's doing, and he's almost lost his visual creative sense in a way. And then the right-hand margin is pretty narrow as well. If he'd already had a stroke, there would have, you can't have anything major happen in your brain without repercussions.
No, as you've already said, the downward slant is extraordinary, isn't it? Starting up and then shoot, and really at the end of every sentence, like you said, with the Christmas Carol manuscript, you have to be careful. Yeah. He may be holding the manuscript on the table at a funny angle, but it really...
Well, and the reason why I think in the final one, it was actually more his mental state, because if you look at the top of the page, it goes down a little bit just at the end, doesn't it? But those final, after that first paragraph, all the lines are going right down, which can be tiredness as well. I mean, if he was just about to die as well, who knows how he was feeling physically.
The word that's going down, I thought it could be flapping, but maybe it's not, or straggling. No, it's not that, is it?
There's a double something, isn't there?
Yes. I mean, it tells us a lot that the word is hard to read, doesn't it? As well,
exactly. It almost looks like a K, though, that it begins. It can't be.
Yes, a K
or an H.
I'll say out every word that has two letters. Okay. So the first word is attendant. No, peeping it wouldn't be two E's, would it? Flapping, attendant.
Well, but where do you see the? I see the L. You think that could be an F? It could be flapping, but I don't see that last letter as a G. Is it clear with yours? Does it look like a G?
No, it doesn't. No, you're right. It doesn't. It doesn't look like that to me. I've got the text here as well, the printed text.
The thing is, I can't see that. Oh, it could be flapping.
I mean, it could be something that never made it into the text. It could be an instruction or a.
Yes, exactly.
Something that he never...
Because is that an asterisk? No, I don't know.
No.
It's very difficult to read, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm so struck, though, just by looking at this again, blowing it up, is the smallness of the words, the writing, and like all that vivacity and charm and excitement and showman.
No,
It's all gone.
It's all been constricted. I mean, if I saw the words themselves in the same line getting smaller and smaller and smaller, starting me, I would be looking at something like Parkinson's. But actually, it's all consistently small. So
yes, wow.
I just feel, just instinctively, he's lost, and obviously he's about to die, but he's lost his zest for life. This is somebody who it's sort of everything's turned a little bit inwards.
Yeah, and it's drained out of him, hasn't it? All
drained
that
out of him,
power.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Bit sad, really. Yeah.
A bit sad. Well, Emma, this has been amazing. Is there anything?
I know, it's been great fun for me. Thanks so much, Dominic.
Not at all.
Bye.
Bye now. Have a lovely day. Thank you for listening to Charles Dickens' A Brain on Fire. If you're enjoying these episodes and would like to make a small donation towards the costs of producing them, please follow the link at the bottom of the description and you can make a donation there. Every coffee you buy makes a huge difference. Thank you ever so much and see you next time.